to Travel Family Academy's channel. This is our YouTube dedicated to teaching you tips, tricks, and everything that works when it comes to flying with babies and toddlers. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to really plan how much time you need at the airport when you're traveling with a baby and a toddler. And yes, it's totally different than when you're traveling by yourself. My name is Mireille, and let's jump right in. If you're brand new here, don't forget to subscribe. We do weekly videos with tons of tips on what really works when it comes to flying with babies and kids. But for now, let's just learn. So, how do you plan your airport time? Here are 9 things that I keep in mind when it comes to flying with babies and how I plan it. But also keep in mind that this all depends on you as well, right? These characteristics are all going to be different from whatever you're flying from and what airport you're in, etc., etc. But these are the things that I always keep in mind. Number 1, check-in time. When I'm thinking about how long I need at the airport with my baby, the first thing that I think about is check-in. Are you checking in online? Are you checking in on site at the counter? Are you using the kiosk? Are you using the curb drop-off? These are all different ways of checking in, and it matters how you do them, because if you're checking in online and you have to, let's say, drop off a bag or drop off your car seat at the gate, then obviously that's going to take you longer than if you're checking in online and you're just going with your carry-on and a carrier and going through security, right? So you want to plan approximately an extra 20 to 30 minutes for checking in on the counter. So if you know you're going to be checking in at the counter versus checking in on the curbside, for example, you need extra time. But just the same, you want to keep in mind that taking your car seat all the way to the gate, it's going to add time at security. So I'm not saying that one of them is the end all be all or the best idea. It really comes down to what your family needs, but it's something to think about. So whenever you're going to plan how much time you need at the airport, one of the first things that you should think about is check-in, right? Does your airport offer a curbside offer so you can do the curbside check-in? Are you traveling with baby gear such as stroller and car seats, and where are those going to be checked in? Because if they're going to be checked in at the gate, then obviously you're not planning for that extra time. If you are checking in, let's say at the kiosk, does your kiosk support printing out handbag tags if you're checking in, again, the car seat bag or a luggage? And lastly, if you're just checking in at the gate, if you're just checking in online and just walking through security, how much are you traveling with, so that you can plan on how long you need for the next point, which is security time, right? Going through security with breast milk, car seats, strollers, a baby carrier, a diaper bag, all of those items are going to delay security, because it's totally different than just going through with a backpack with a laptop inside, right? If you're like us and you create content for a living, or you love taking photos, or you have to work while you go, so you're bringing your laptop and your computer and all that stuff, you always plan for this, right? You allow extra time because you know you have to take your computer out, your tablet out, and then they might want to recheck your cables or your stuff, whatever, right? The same thing applies when you're traveling with baby items. If you're traveling with a car seat bag, the first thing you have to keep in mind is that you want to take everything out of your car seat bag before it goes through security. You do not want to go through security, like get to security and try to push your whole car seat bag with everything, because I guarantee you 9 out of 10 times, they're going to make you open the whole thing up and pass it through security again. So, security time. What are you bringing with you on security? To the gate. Are you bringing a car seat bag? Are you bringing a stroller? Are you bringing breast milk and or formula? Are you bringing liquids for your baby? And are you bringing a pumping machine with you for pumping on the go on the flight, for example? And what's inside of your diaper bag? So all of those things I would just keep in consideration and add 2 to 3 minutes of time for security per item you're taking, depending on how complicated it is. The tip for bringing a car seat bag with you and going through security with it is taking everything out of it, so that when you go through security, like, everything is already out. They don't have to like start, just going through your bag to see what's inside. A tip for traveling with breast milk, formula, or baby food that's a little bit more liquid is also to take it out, put it in clear containers, and let the TSA person know that you're going to be traveling with that, so that they know how to test it. If you're traveling with breast milk or regular milk, they will also be wanting to test this, because you're allowed to bring a lot more than just 100 milliliters or 3.5 ounces. So you can just go through security and just let them know, hey, all of this is baby food, baby liquids, baby water, breast milk, etc. They'll test that separately. It'll take a little bit longer depending on how busy they are, but it's better than trying to push that through security and then they see the liquids and interrogate you about what it is, put it all the way back, and they still have to test it anyway, so it just takes you longer. Just keep that in mind when you're traveling with this sort of thing. Number three to keep in mind is the boarding. And the reason this matters is because whether you're a person who likes to board at the beginning of a flight to, let's say, put your baby to sleep right away because it's their nap time, or waiting to board at the end of a flight because your baby or your toddler is super active and you didn't get a chance to, you know, take him to the park before flying, then you want to make sure you allot the right time for boarding. So if you have a lot of items with you, like let's say you are carrying with a car seat, flying, like boarding with a car seat, or you're boarding with your stroller that you can put in the overhead compartment, you want to allot enough time for the boarding process for this. My tip here is if you're traveling with any kind of baby equipment, I mean, generally speaking, it's always a good idea to do priority boarding, and you're allowed to when you have a baby, usually on most airlines. But if you're not sure this is an option for you, double check with your agents before boarding time and plan this accordingly. The first time, it may be a little rough. It may be a little like, you know, trial and error. But the more you do this, the easier it'll get. And depending on how much gear you're traveling with, like if you're traveling with a car seat, even if you're not priority, they will let you board first because they realize that it takes a while to install a car seat on a flight. If you're traveling with a partner, my recommendation is to have one of the parents board a flight and install the car seat, and the other parent stays behind and boards afterwards. That way you can have your cake and eat it too. So you can put all your luggage in the plane, store everything where you need to so you make sure you're not running out of space. You can go ahead and strap your car seat and have it ready. And let's say the other parent boards later. So those 30 minutes between the beginning and the end of boarding, that child can be outside running around, you know, burning some energies, blowing off some steam, so that when they get to the plane, they're not trying to, like, you know, be exhausted at that, start playing at that point. The point is that when they get to the plane, they're already tired, and at least they're a little bit more ready to, you know, just start winding down and not be jumping on the seat. The next thing you want to keep in mind when you're planning your airport is parking. So obviously this won't pertain to you if you're taking an Uber, but this is something to keep in mind because if you're driving to the airport, whether it is to drop off a rental or to park your car at the airport or to park your car in a near airport parking lot, if you're leaving it there for like however long your trip is, you need to keep in mind if you're leaving it at a parking lot outside of the airport, you want to plan how long it takes for the shuttle to take you from there to the actual terminal so you can check in. Sometimes this can add another 30 minutes, and if you didn't plan for it, then you're just going to be running at the airport. You want to think about, if you're parking yourself, how busy the airport parking lot is at this time. Sometimes when people are arriving on flights or departing, it could be really busy. I mean, airports in general tend to be a little bit more higher traffic than other places. So it's just something for you to think about, because the last thing you want is to arrive at the airport thinking, okay, I'm on time. And then you get to the parking lot and you realize there's a 15-20 minute wait to even find the parking at the parking lot of the airport. And then that delays your whole process, you know, for the check-in and security. And then, of course, if you are just being dropped off with an Uber, it's a little bit easier, or a taxi. It's a little bit easier because you're not planning for parking yourself, but you will be planning on the next point, which is traffic. Traffic is something you always want to look ahead. So what I like to do is the day before or 2 days before flying, especially, this is especially important if you're in a new destination. Like if you're home, if you live in LA and you're going to LAX, then you sort of can, maybe you've flown enough where you know you can ask friends or whatever. But let's say you're in Tokyo and you don't know how long it takes to get to the airport. Like, you check in for how long it takes to the airport at 11 at night is going to be different than checking at 9 in the morning when maybe your flight is happening. So what I would suggest is a day or two before you're departing, look up around the time in which you're going to be planning to go to the airport. Just go on Google Maps or whatever maps app you're using, put in the directions for the airport, and see how long it takes at the time that you would be going to the airport. That way you can actually have an accurate estimate of what the traffic looks like, right? Obviously, keep in mind Sundays, weekends, if you're in a country where their weekend is on Friday or Saturday, all these things take place, but traffic is something to definitely keep in mind, because I cannot tell you how many times I've run to the airport because I planned 2 hours, 3 hours, you know, based on traffic, and then we had a delay. Obviously, you're not always going to be able to predict traffic. This is impossible, but having an idea of how long it takes is definitely going to save you a lot of stress and anxiousness, especially if you do encounter traffic on the way to the airport. Speaking of this, weather is a big thing to remember and keep in mind, because let's say that today it's raining and you look at the weather and tomorrow it's raining too. You may want to add, you know, an extra 30 minutes, especially if you're driving that car back to the airport, if you're in a different destination, or especially if it's nighttime, or any of these conditions, like if it's snowing and you're not used to driving in the snow, or if it's snowing and, you know, it's just a blizzard condition. All of these things, think about what the weather is going to look like tomorrow. And obviously there are apps that help you plan ahead a few days in advance, but just something to keep in mind. You're not going to be able to plan this 2 months before you fly, but it is something to do the week before you fly, to continuously be looking at the weather so you can plan your arrival. And this is regardless of whether you're going to be driven to the airport or driving yourself. Obviously, being driven takes a little bit of the edge off of like, oh my gosh, I'm driving, but you're still going to be driven. So if there are delays on the road because of weather conditions, it's going to affect you whether you're taking a taxi, a bus, or driving yourself. Trains may not be as affected. So obviously, if you're in Europe or somewhere that has a lot of trains, this is something to keep in mind, that maybe if you're, for example, deciding how to get to the airport and the weather's going to be bad, a train and a metro probably will perform better with bad weather than, let's say, an Uber or driving yourself. One other thing that I always like to keep in mind that people don't usually think about, and I used to not think about, is terminal size, aka airport size. We just recently flew in the morning out of Madeira Island in Portugal, and we were able to be there an hour before the plane. And it was such a breeze. It was so easy. It was just so fast, even though the plane was leaving at 7 in the morning. In LAX, a flight leaving at 7 in the morning may actually be a little bit of traffic getting to the airport, So obviously keep in mind how big the airport you have is. I would never fly with just an hour out of Miami International Airport or New York or London. But here in Hawaii, an hour might be enough, right? So it's just something for you to keep in mind, how big the terminal you're flying out of is. And this is especially important, again, if you're flying out of a new place. Like if you're on vacation and you're planning your way back, one more thing that you don't want to be stressing about, you get to the airport and all of a sudden you don't know, where your terminal is. And another thing is knowing where your terminal is, what terminal your airport is flying out of. So, I mean, your flight is flying out of. So if you're flying out of, Terminal A, you do not want to be dropped off in Terminal 3 or Terminal C or however it goes in the airport that you're flying out of. So just something to keep in mind, the size of the airport and the terminals, and just plan out when to get off, because it can make a difference. I've been to airports where going from Terminal 1 to Terminal 3 can take up to 30 minutes and you cannot walk. So something to keep in mind, definitely is something worth adding to your planning. And the next thing is distance. This is a pretty obvious one, but distance really matters, especially, again, if the distance from where you're staying to where you're going to be flying, so the airport, is going through the city. Sometimes distance is really long, but you go on a street that's like bordering the city. How like some cities have like a circle around them. So like if you go in the perimeter around the city, you avoid traffic, but sometimes that's not an option at all. So keep in mind, again, how far the airport is from where you're staying, and how easy it is to get to the airport, right? Because that distance really makes a difference whether you're going through a side road, a highway, or a city street. So always things to keep in mind. The next one is going to be personal comfort. Personal comfort, obviously, this is self-explanatory, but just remember that just because everybody gets to the airport 2 hours and that works for them doesn't mean that 4 hours couldn't work for you. Ultimately, what works best is what's best for your family and your schedule and your own level of comfort when it comes to rushing and being in a hectic atmosphere. Remember, airports, there's all kinds of people doing all kinds of things. Everybody's doing their own thing, and there's a lot of like stimulus. So just keep that in mind when you're planning your own trip, especially if it's the first time taking your baby or your toddler on a flight. This could be an especially nerve-wracking situation. So just give yourself some grace, plan so that you feel comfortable and that, you are taken care of. Because if you are at peace with what's happening and you're able to comfortably go through the airport without getting too anxious, this is the energy your baby is going to pick up. But if you're all like stressed out and anxious, trying to run through, and you're not giving that time for your baby to like connect with you and, just sort of explain the whole airport experience, they also start feeding off of this anxious energy that you have, and that makes them enjoy the flight even less. So some things to keep in mind. Let us know which other considerations you would keep in mind when planning airport time in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you like this kind of content. We'll continue sharing tips on how to travel with toddlers and babies. Thanks for watching.